Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the next of our Essential series. I'm Lottie, founder of the Jura Society. The Jura Society brings women wealth holders and their advisors together through education, connection, and collaboration across our three pillars of women, wealth, and well-being. This afternoon, I'm delighted to bring the brilliant Megan Locke, Head of Research at ArtTactic, to join us in conversation as she offers a candid and data-rich introduction to today's global art market. Blending historical context and sharp analytical insights, Megan's going to unpack the mechanisms that define and sustain value in the art world, from the invisible forces of connoisseurship and market perception to the quantifiable influence of pricing trends, provenance, and buyer behaviour. Please note this is for education purposes only, but if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat here if you're watching us live, or reach out to myself or Megan directly afterwards. So, just going to get Megan in now. Good afternoon, Megan. How are you?
Hi, Lottie. I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, lovely, and all the better for seeing you. You always brighten up any day. And I just wanted to recap and to remind everybody we had this fantastic event together the other week where you shared so many wonderful insights on collecting works on paper. So huge thank you to you again for that.
Well, and thank you to everyone who came. It was a full house. We could have stayed all night looking at drawings, but
It was magical, magical. So for anybody who doesn't know you or didn't meet you on that night, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Of course. So, well, yeah, I'm Megan. I work for ArtTactic as their head of business development. We also do a lot of research. But basically, for those of you who don't know, ArtTactic is a research and analytics company for the art market. One of the easiest ways to describe it is it's basically like a research, the research floor in an investment bank. So I used to work in finance, in fixed income sales and trading, and then just did a complete pivot and decided that I would prefer to sell art rather than bonds. And, spruced up, got a master's degree, worked at an art gallery for 10 years. And now for the last few years have been working with ArtTactic to try and really make some sense out of what is quite a confusing and a bit mysterious, opaque world that is the art market. So.
Fantastic. Well, that is a great overview. Thank you so much. And I guess we can't start this conversation without mentioning value. So how would you define value in the art world, given your breadth of knowledge?
So I think value is such a funny concept, especially when it comes to art, because people do derive value in so many different ways. Is it just because you love an image, or are you looking for investment value? So this is a very broad generalization, but I would say historically, much more personal value was placed on art in the sense of taste, or whether a person had an ethos to their collecting, rather than the investment value, which, investment is probably the more traditional definition of value. But as time goes on, art has become much more of an asset, increasingly family offices, wealth managers, large private banks, art advisory is a service that is increasingly being offered. So when you look at value that way in terms of art, I'd say a very base definition would be the inherent agreement that an artist or a work by a specific artist has and will retain its significance over time, which then translates into financial returns. Even though it's very romantic to think that everybody has a, personal value on art, we are in the business of selling art. So I can't pretend that that's not the point. One of the best things someone said to me when I first started my career at a gallery was that the market is a beast and it has to be fed. So, there is an element of turnover. You're going to buy something maybe because you love it, maybe because you want a return on it. It's It's what makes the world go round.
Yeah, I love that. And I like that definition of significance as well, because again, that is very objective. But it is all objective. However, as you rightly say, the market does dictate to a certain degree what this concept of value is in general. Yeah, so I think it's a fantastic way. And, we could have a whole philosophical question, debate on actually value. But how has this definition shifted over time, I guess, across different market segments? I know you touched on that briefly, but what would you say?
Yeah, so again, it does depends on the goal of a collector. Are they looking for canonical importance, maybe to add to a collection if they collect something very specific, or are they looking for value growth or something that's more of a value store? So again, a few different ways to look at it, but as an example for a value store, especially when the markets are all over the place, kind of the world is an interesting place right now. But if you wanted a value store, very likely someone would go for the blue chip artists at the moment, really impressionists through post-war, because again, as a generalization, the risk there is much lower. They come at a much higher price point. So they are expensive, but less risky. However, if you were looking for value growth, that would be more of a search into what is currently being undervalued. So, there's a few ways that you can go about that. One of the huge drivers in the market is supply. Obviously, art is created. If you're going all the way back through old masters, a lot of these artists are no longer with us. So there is a finite supply of what is available. But then as time moves on, this issue obviously moves forward in time. So it leads the market to find value in different places. Well, my history is in the old masters. And it's also a very easy example. So we'll just start there. But historically, in the old master market, some of the most valuable things were from the Italian Renaissance. And this dates back to, the earliest history of collecting when it became really popular, particularly in the UK, when all of the young gentlemen were going on their grand tours and traveling around Europe and bringing things back. It wasn't necessarily about the monetary value at that point, but it was, I am traveled, I am cultured, come into my home and see all of these incredible things that I have. But then as time went on and things started to have more of a monetary value, that's when the market really picked up. So it would be, it started with old master Italian pieces, but then when those are all put into private collections or purchased by museums, institutions, they're taken off the market. So like I said, we have to look in different places for value. So you can kind of trace over time, it would go to French 18th century, then Dutch 17th century. And now a lot of old master sales, people will notice, actually have quite a few works from the 19th century, which hadn't necessarily been considered old masters previously if you looked at the very specific definitions. But if you're looking for great examples of artworks that aren't in museums, sometimes you do have to, like I said, just look elsewhere. A few examples of that. Obviously, there's not that many of the, let's say, household names for the Italian Renaissance. They're not on the market that frequently, but when something with very traditional value comes up, they tend to fly. So, a few years ago, there was the $92 million Botticelli that sold. And just a few weeks ago, Canaletto sold in London for $43 million. So, when those examples come up, they are, absolutely top notch, but it just doesn't happen very often. But some more recent examples, kind of moving forward in history, women artists are, everyone is trying to reach parity. We're still quite far off, but we are making strides. And that would be a great place to find value in some scenarios. So yeah, as an example, Marlo Moss. She is a British artist who was within the same school as Mondrian. So everybody's heard of Mondrian.
Yeah.
But he had a work sell a few years ago for $47 million. Marlo Moss, same historical period, aesthetically, you're looking at the same thing. Her market is on the way up. She just sold for double her estimate at roughly $500,000.
Wow, that's significantly different.
Difference. But, it's kind of sometimes in terms of art history and the market, history is written by the victors. And we are having a moment right now where people are looking back, kind of throwing away the traditional textbooks and really just trying to find some incredible artists that hadn't really made it to the forefront, didn't make it into our art history curriculums when we were at school. And, so that's where a lot of value is at the moment.
Yeah, I love that, and the idea of sort of digging for treasure in the art market as well. And I guess you touched on the role of institutional acquisitions. How do you see that as influencing or reflecting the broader market trends? Because obviously they've really got a lot of visibility on a global scale. So what's your view on that?
So one thing that we have actually noticed in a lot of our research as of late is that, and again, it is a broad generalization, and we'll get to this later in terms of the data, but we have noticed a trend where museums, and what's going on in terms of their activity, what exhibitions they have planned, they do tend to be a bit of a precursor to market trends by a few years. So, some could say that it's a bit of the cart leading the horse, that, if there is going to be a huge exhibition focusing on women artists, it's going to raise awareness, and then those pieces will come to the market. But that also doesn't change the numbers, no matter how or why it happens. That's what we've seen. So we are very much in that trend at the moment. But an interesting one that has just kind of come out or become apparent to me, through our data and just seeing the sales, is that 19th century Danish artists, which I know feels a little bit specific, but they do seem to be having a bit of a moment. As I was walking around the sales in London a few weeks ago, I noticed quite a few more works by artists I had heard of before, Hammershøi being an example. I'd only seen him at a few galleries. I'd really never seen him at auction in the evening sales. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then looking into it a little bit more, there were quite a few examples across, all the auction houses that participated in the summer season. And then a few years ago, there actually were some exhibitions. So there was an exhibition that highlighted 19th century Danish art in Paris. And then there was one at the Metropolitan Museum, which then traveled to the Getty in LA. So it's kind of funny how, that was like 2022, 2023, fast forward to summer 2025, I see like 7 to 10 paintings for sale between galleries and the auction houses. But they're getting quite a bit of a spotlight. So, there is definitely a correlation there.
Do you think that the gallery, do you think that the museums sort of, do they chat to each other and they go, hey, we've got this coming on? Or is it just complete coincidence that they were both exhibiting 19th century Danish artists at similar times?
So it's one of those tough things that we talk about it all the time. And, when I worked at a gallery, it was a huge topic of conversation. In the art world, historically was a pretty strict divide between academia, or, so the institutions, and the commercial market. It was basically trying to preserve the sanctity of academia. You didn't want that to be influenced by, the commercial sector and what was happening. And there is still an effort to, keep one completely neutral. But the reality of the situation is that both sides need each other. It is a big thing for museums to buy at the auctions. They also buy through dealers quite a bit. It's a big selling point of a lot of art events. Whether it's old masters or contemporary, the art world puts in a huge effort to make sure that curators and museum professionals can come to events from all around the world. So there is definite overlap. There is conversation, but it's a very interesting market in that sense, and everybody is talking to each other. It's
its own little ecosystem, symbiotic bubble.
Yes, it's its own little ecosystem, and it's incredible, who you meet and what you learn, what you see. But we're a bit on a merry-go-round. Everybody's kind of just going around the globe and seeing as much as they can and chatting to as many people as they can. And that's where all of these trends start to emerge.
Well, exactly. And I think this is where also data, which is what you guys specialize in, really comes to the fore in helping to determine the pricing. But to what extent does that impact from what you've seen?
So data in the art market can be a little bit tricky because, the art market is some people say it's like the last unregulated market. So obviously anything that sells at auction is publicly available data. Sometimes it can be hard to find, or at least hard to find in bulk. But there are, other firms, so not just ArtTactic, but a few others that are in the business of art data. But just over 50% of the market is, I think the last time I checked, it was 48% was at auction and 52% was in the gallery space. So that's just over half the market is completely private data. All you can rely on is what you get told by dealers. But of course, there's no way to actually know if that self-reporting is accurate.
Yes.
So data in the art market is it's extremely important because it is the only concrete information that collectors, dealers, investors have to go on, but it cannot be taken just by itself. That is why relationships and some kind of market expertise, boots on the ground, is still so important. And I think the other thing that is tricky about art data, especially in our current environment, is you need to be very careful about where you get your data, because there's a lot of fantastic services out there. But what I always found interesting is that ArtTactic is actually one of the only fully independent art market research firms, as in we do not buy, sell, or broker any art sales. We provide the foundational information, just strict research and trend analysis that professionals need to then form their own opinions. Whereas so many other firms have auction arms or private sales platforms attached to that. So, as in any industry, data can tell you what you want it to tell. It can tell many stories.
Confirmation bias via data.
It is, yes. So at ArtTactic, we put in a huge effort to be completely unbiased. So we can slice and dice the data in 1,000 different ways, but it's just, this is what's happened historically. This is, what is going on. So we work with a lot of private banks, family offices, wealth managers, or advisors. And we say, here is what has happened. This is what's happened over the last 10 to 15 years. This is what all of our surveys and the market is saying. But you have 20 years of expertise yourself, and that's kind of your USP to your client. So now you know that you have a rock solid foundation in terms of the information you're working off of, and then layer on your expertise, and that's what you can give to your client. So we're not in the business of advisory. We are, in the research and information business, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, 100%. But there surely must be some limitations, perhaps, on what data can reveal in that sense. And also the way it's managed, because if you're providing that data to, say, your wealth managers or whatever, they might misread it or something like that, and actually you're like, no.
Well, that's the thing about the art world, is we can tell you historically what has happened using all of the data points available to us. But at the end of the day, the price of something is determined by who was in the auction room that day. So you can have something go for an absolutely astronomical price because there were just two people who really wanted it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that something is innately that valuable. Or it could be, I don't know, a sale, on Memorial Day. So you're missing out like the entire American market, which has happened, which did happen earlier this year. So I think it was. So just like, it is very situational. So yes, there's absolute limitations. But also, it's the kind of market that is hugely impacted by what is happening on a global scale. So obviously the last 5 years have been really interesting. Everything shut down during COVID. Then the art world actually experienced a huge boom. And we've now been, any news that you read, and again, this is, where data can be a great and a terrible thing. It's like, oh, the art market is dying. The bubbles burst. We're down 30% year over year. And now it's like the second or third year that everyone's saying that. So some people are really pessimistic. And yes, that is what the data is saying if you just look at the numbers at face value. But it's really just the top end of the market that has burst. And
it's
volume,
a correction, I suppose, in some sense as well.
Everybody has a different opinion. Personally, I think it's more of a correction. People are not chasing the highs quite as much. People are just being a bit more sensible because nobody knows what's going on. So everybody is, unless something is absolutely spectacular, some people are sitting on their hands, or, in terms of the purchases, it's just at a lower price point. So, volume is not down, it's just value. So, the 5 million plus, that is down, and that is really going to impact the bottom line of the market. But, like 200,000 and below, that's really turning over. So, it really
and
depends.
I suppose you might get the buyer who's actually, acquiring, say, 5 pieces at the 200 grand mark because they want to diversify greater. So actually they're scooping up those rather than buying one showstop piece, because the uncertainty on a global thing, not just in the art market, but in life in general, is quite uncertain right now.
Yeah. So it's, less capital at risk with just one asset. So yeah. But that doesn't mean the art market is dying. That means the art market is changing. And yes.
Metamorphosizing, is that
exactly.
The word? So what trends are you seeing in pricing across these different sectors? Contemporary, old masters, ultra contemporary, things like that.
So pretty much exactly that people are just becoming a bit more sensible. But there's also with that a change in taste and collecting habits. So, everybody's talking about the great wealth transfer, not just within the art market, but across industries. And we're starting to see that trickle down. I think there's still a lot of game left to play in terms of seeing how that really transpires. But one thing that we are seeing is previous generations, a lot of collectors had more of a, I'm going to say a collection, this is our,
it was cohesive.
Exactly. Yeah. So they were looking at one genre or, one medium, we're much more specific, whereas younger collectors, for the most part, do seem to be a bit more cross category. You see that reflected in the way auction houses are structuring their sales. But then because of that, they're also a bit pickier. It's not like they are as confined in terms of what they've decided to collect. So they can go a bit more cross category and say like, oh, even though that, is a mediocre example of the genre I collect, I don't have to go for that. I can go for the things that I really want to. So yeah, they're being more sensible, not spending quite as much, those really high ticket prices. We're seeing, much fewer of those, but it is everything is still ticking over. People are what's nice is when you're on the ground, sometimes you really get a sense. The art market is very much a place as well where perception can be reality. Great to overlay that with data, but if you walk into a fair and it feels a bit, down, there isn't a buzz, or vice versa. If you walk in and everyone is really happy and it feels buzzy, that can translate into sales. So
well, I think, there's so much in there. And I think, the essence of art is humanity and exploration in humanity in its finest sense as well. And all markets are dictated to by human behavior ultimately, which I find fascinating. And so the role of relationships is so important, and the human connection. How do you see it, as an influence still on networks, relationships between all of the players, let's say, in the theatre of the art market, accessing top tier work?
Well, so I think one of the things about the art market is that for so many people, unless you really studied it or it's something that you're really passionate about, there is just so much information that it can be very hard to fully absorb or to really know what you're looking at. There's just so much to it. So a lot of relationships, it is just based on trust. So I think, and also, if you're trying to find an art advisor or, something like that, there are so many people out there that it's so difficult to narrow it down into, someone who understands you, what you're looking for, but then someone that you really trust. I think, big red flag is if you happen to be working with an advisor and they are telling you that you need to go, you have to act right now. Like that's probably a pretty big red flag. And, sometimes, yes, you do need to go, but sometimes you just need to pull back a little bit and, really think about it. Obviously, auctions are a fast-paced environment, but it's, I think so much of the market, especially because more than half of it is not publicly available information, is based on trust. And that kind of trust is only built over time. So whether it's a client building that trust with their advisor or dealers building that trust with each other or with curators. The ecosystem has so many different branches to it, but the art world is a funny place. Once we enter it, everybody seems to stay for the rest of their life. You kind of grow with your peers, and it is wonderful, but then can also, I absolutely see from the outside, it feels a bit hard to break into. But the one piece of advice I would have is to just ask questions. So like galleries can be intimidating, auctions can be intimidating. I'd probably start at an auction house in terms of asking questions. there are people on the ground circulating. It's a much easier place to get information from to start. So yeah, that
Love
would be,
that.
yeah.
That's one of your top tips. Ask the questions. Know what you want to ask sometimes is the hardest thing. But yes, speak to somebody to get your questions prepped if that is even like a really tricky starting point. But I love that you touched on other red flags that you think buyers should watch out for, either privately or through auctions.
I think if you're buying from a dealer, let's say, it definitely depends on what kind of art you're buying in terms of what information is actually available. If you're buying on the secondary market, which is, things that have already been sold, they're circulating, whether it's at auction or from a dealer. If dealers are not very forthcoming in terms of the history of a piece, if it was purchased at auction, there are tools out there where you can search something. Yes, of course, everyone needs to make a profit and keep the lights on. Like I said, it is a business after all, but there should be an element of transparency there. And I do think that the best dealers realize that it's not just about this sale. It's if they're going to foster a long-term relationship with their clients, they can be honest about, aspects of the sale, the provenance of a piece, even potentially the pricing history of a piece, and be able to back that up. And that, I think, is part of what builds the trust and relationships. If you can just provide all of the information and then a collector decides that it's not for them, that's fine. And then, maybe down the line, something will be for them, but they know that you're not just going to try and sell them something for the sake of the sale. You're going to have an open dialogue.
Yes, less of an estate agent approach.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, it kind of goes hand in hand with the original red flag. If someone is just go, 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 this all has to happen right now. Someone else is trying to buy it. It's, that's definitely a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need that. You don't need that kind of pressure.
No.
So why don't we look to the future briefly? Get your crystal ball out. What artist geographies or mediums do you see as being sort of the key areas for collectors over the next decade?
So I think, I am biased because this is where, the area that I used to work in, but that is why I was there for 10 years. Maybe that's part of my crystal ball. But especially given the global climate right now, I think one of the best areas that someone could start in is works on paper. So whether that's original works on paper or prints and editions, there's so many reasons, but one of them is price point. So it does allow a person to get involved at a price point that is not going to completely break the bank. If you buy a drawing or maybe even a print and you realize that you've messed up, you don't understand the additions, or it's, an artwork that was unattributed, maybe you're going old masters, you don't have to be as self-conscious about it because it's not like you are, really spending the big bucks. It allows you to engage and, maybe make a few mistakes. But the other thing that I find is prints and editions or drawings, generally, they're smaller, they're more intimate. It is easier to wrap your head around than a giant canvas that you spend a lot of money on, need to find a home for, are really worried about the insurance. So I've always been drawn to works on paper for that reason. It feels like something that I can really engage with. I feel very close to the artist. And you can get trusted names. You can get blue chip names for a fraction of the price. So whether that's original, like I said, or a printer edition, there are a lot of great resources out there right now that actually do focus specifically on prints. So, that market really is booming because a lot of people feel that it's a safer area, lower price point, but still blue chip artists, easier to document. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
I'd
and
say
there's something so romantic about them, and I know in the talk that we did a couple of weeks ago, that you get the thumbprint, or you get the sort of
yeah,
the workings, and that, the tactility of some of these pieces as well, rather than a finished piece,
exactly.
is just so magical. And I know that everybody who left that talk was like, right, I'm going to start collecting art that works on
Yeah,
paper. There's something magical about them,
yeah,
which you don't necessarily get if you're going right at the top end of some kind of finished masterpiece. And you can have lots of them. Like,
yes.
why
No,
not?
it's the salon style hang is
Yeah,
coming back. It's
yeah.
yeah, that's that. You don't have to choose just one. You can have a whole wall.
You
That's the
can,
yeah,
you can like rotate them every week or however long you need.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's also think quickly, future next gen collectors, balancing personal taste to long term value. Where do you see that that dance aligning?
So I think what's really interesting about next gen collectors right now is kind of like I said, they are collecting very differently from their parents. So yeah, it's much more cross category. I think they are much more driven by taste. I mean, it is a bit tough to say because art as an asset is also booming. So you kind of have two different areas of collecting. But yeah, I'll kind of go for the more romantic side, which I like to think is the majority of the market. But yeah, so they're being more sensible. At this moment in time, there's not as many next gen collectors who are really batting like all the way at the top. So I think, yeah, it's very taste driven. They're being a bit more sensible, but they are still very engaged with ultra contemporary artwork. So young living artists.
Yeah,
So on the one hand, that can be a little bit risky, but on the other hand, there is an element of next gen collectors really want to nurture up and coming
yeah,
artists, which obviously there is a huge value journey there. So, we could talk for 3 hours on that
yeah.
alone, but it's really refreshing. It's really fun to research and great to be involved in. So I think that is kind of a nice trend that we haven't seen quite as openly for a while, I think.
Yeah,
So
and I think it's that element of patronage as well.
yes,
That the next gen,
modeling.
it's the impact investing for the art world is buying works by living artists. You're investing in them; they can continue to run their studios, and I think that is also a beautiful part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Is nurturing talent and retaining the concept of the artist.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's a tough world out there, so we all need to support.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that. Before we let you go, could you give us, say, two of your top tips for collectors, either current or aspiring?
Um, well, this is more towards aspiring
Yeah.
collectors. And it's the first thing I was told when I entered the art world. The best thing you can do is just go look at things. Whether you are looking at the National Gallery or the Met, just go look at things, train your eye, figure out what you do and don't like. So all of the auction houses, when they have sales on view, they are open to the public. You can just walk in and mosey around Sotheby's or Christie's or Phillips and see whatever they have on the walls. If you are trying, obviously there's the monetary aspect. The estimates are also on all of the labels. So you can have a walk around, you can look at the different generations of art, the different styles, whether it works on paper, painting, sculpture, and see what all of those price points are. But it does just take a long time to figure out what do you actually like versus what does the market seem to like. I think that is the biggest and
Yeah.
most important thing that you can figure out as a collector.
Yeah, and in life, I think identifying
Yes.
your own identity is another
Yeah.
philosophical minefield. But yeah, I think that's a brilliant tip. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I'd say the last or the second one, last one would just, like I said earlier, don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, yes, the art world can be very intimidating, but at the heart of it, we all love what we do. And there is a lot of research that goes into what we do. And so like that was always my favorite part about being at a gallery, is somebody walking in off the street and then asking questions. You know, that's why we write the catalogs. That's what we prep for.
The
So,
passion
you know,
behind it.
there is a passion behind it. You know, of course, sometimes people get frustrated if they say someone's a time waster, but that is like the tiny percent of the art market. You know, most people or most professionals, we're here to chat. We're here to talk about it. That's the only way that we meet people, and you find someone that you trust. So
I love that.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and experience and expectations for the art market. I really hope that everybody who's tuned in has enjoyed this as much as I have. And if you
Thank you so
are
much for
watching
having me.
yeah, well, thank you, Megan. Always a pleasure to pick your brains, as wonderful as they are. So thank you again, and I hope to see you all very soon. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions, reach out to myself or Megan. And as she says, she loves a chat and she's got all the answers. So if you do want to have a chat, go to Megan. She's your girl. But yeah, thank you so much. That was so interesting.
Thank you, Lottie. Yep.
Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.